Thank you for having me. I'm Carlton. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited about the Djangonauts program. I think it's just the best thing to happen in Django in so long. And so to get to talk to you is a real treat. You know, it's exciting. Today's talk is called Knowing Your Limits and Surviving Open Source. Right? So you're excited to be on the program. I'm excited about the program. Everybody is exciting. So excited. Like here's Tim. I'm loving the energy from the latest Djangonaut cohort. Every meeting leaves me energetic, wanting to solve all the problems. I'm excited for the future of Django. So it's not just the program. It's not just being here. It's everything, right? But open source just isn't always roses. It's just not. So I want to give you some thoughts on that, and hopefully you can take those away. And then all the excitement of the program, we can avoid the bad bits. That's the high-minded goal of the talk. But if I'm going to give you some thoughts on that, then I have to really answer a question: who on earth is this old man, and why on earth should you listen to me? Well, I'm Carlton. Well, okay, and this is me, and there's my avatar there, and I'm on GitHub at Carlton Gibson, and I'm on Foster Don, and I've got a website where I blog, and I've got a podcast, Django Chat, with my friend Will, that you should listen to. You should check all of those out. Please follow along. There's an RSS feed if you like that sort of thing. If you don't know me, then between 2018 and 2023, I was one of the Django Fellows. And I got to be Django Fellows. They look after Django, right? They keep it on the road. And I got to be the Django Fellow because I'm a maintainer of lots of things Django. I've been using Django essentially forever. And as part of that, I've spent more than a decade helping to maintain a number of the key packages in the ecosystem. So you might have heard of some of them: Django REST Framework, Django Filter, Django Crispy Forms, Django Compressor, Django AppConf. I maintain the channels trio: channels Daphne, channels Redis. At the moment, I'm playing with Neapolitan, which is my take on quick CRUD views for Django's, and Django template partials, which gives named template fragments to the Django template language. Now, all of that is just to say I've been at it a while, right? I believe in open source. I'm vested in open source. I think it's wonderful. And if you were to say to me, hey, should I do open source? I'm going to say, heck yes, right? But I've also been around the block. I know the pitfalls. I've seen them in action. And so I'm hoping that my few words will be used to you in the context of the Djangonauts program as you step out on your open source journey. That's the idea. So while we're going, I want you to have a question in mind. I want you to think, what is it that's driving you? What is it that you're here for? Why are you doing open source? So let me just give you some reasons why you might be doing open source. Well, open source is an investment in your business. I began contributing to Django REST Framework because I was building my career, my business around Django. I was using those handful of key packages, and I had to know that they were going to keep working, right? I couldn't have them just break. So by contributing to those packages, I could guarantee that one of them wasn't just going to fall out under me. Like Django Crispy Forms, the reason I became a maintainer of Django Crispy Forms is because it was literally at the point of doing that. If I hadn't have stepped in, Django 1.8 would have been released and one of my key dependencies would have been broken. What was I going to do? I'm going to take it on. Open source, well, it's a great way to learn. I say it's a great way to learn. I actually think it's quite likely the best way to learn. You want to up your skills. Well, open up the source code of one of your dependencies, say Django. Start fixing issues, reviewing PRs, adding tests. Depending on your level, you think you know Django now, right? But you will do after you've done a few bits of open source, I promise you. The depth of knowledge increases. So I was building API backends for mobile apps for Django REST Framework. That I was also helping to maintain REST Framework meant that I knew it well enough that I could make the customizations that you always need in any project, right? Nothing's just straight out of the tutorial. You always need to do something custom. Well, because I knew throughout the framework, I could do that. And I think you're also learning on some of the best code out there, right? The code that you work on at work, it's probably not that great. It starts to get matchstick starts together with glue, and that's how every application always is. Well, open source code is generally a level above that, and you're learning from that code, so you can pick up a lot. Open source does wonders for your CV. It can help your profile, right? I think, and that's at every single level you are. If you're a junior with no relevant experience to lean on, being able to point at the project that you've been active on shows exactly what a hiring manager is going to be looking for in that interview. And it's almost certain that none of the other applicants for that job have that experience, right? It makes you stand out from the crowd. you can't always show work that you've done, right? There's probably some NDA clause in your contract, but even if you weren't, it's kind of proprietary private code. You can't show it. Well, they often want to see sample code. So if you can point to your open source contributions, that's something that you've done that is visible and which is publicly shareable. When I started on REST Framework, it fundamentally altered the hiring conversation for me. Instead of them being skeptical, well, can this do it? Can this guy do it? How do we know? Is he any good? They were like, oh, you maintain REST Framework. Yeah, we're using that. And so it just, instead of starting here, you're starting all the way up here. It radically changed it. Now, it doesn't do that instantly. It takes time to build up a track record, but open source, it really opened an awful lot of doors for me, and it can do the same for you too. But I think more than all of these is open source is a chance to give back. I think investing in your business, learning, building your profile, they're all great reasons to be involved in open source. I think they're valid, but I don't know anybody who's been doing it for a while who does it purely for those reasons. Python, Brett Cannon, who's a core contributor, long-time core contributor to Python, he's got this phrase, I came for the language, but I stayed for the community, right? People talk about that all the time. In Django, we have this idea that Django's first and foremost a community, and then it's an ecosystem, and only finally it's a framework. So in Django, the Django bit, like that's the least of it. That's the bit that matters, just the absolute least. Right? It's the friendships we make, it's the relationships we build. They're the point of it. That's why we keep coming back. The community is built on the individual efforts that we each put into it, be that code, be that organizing a conference, be that a meetup, be that a program like Djangonauts, right? But the community is more than these efforts. It's kind of like a commons. It's a shared resource that we've built. And, in the 21st century, that you get to be a part of that shared resource, I think that's a truly wonderful thing. Well, anyway, so why are you doing open source, right? What is it that brings you here? Now, it's important because there are dangers. And when I was typing up this slide, I spelt them dangerous. And that's actually how I just typing it away. There are dangers. I thought I'd leave that there. If you're clear on why you're doing open source, it helps you to avoid the dangers, right? So that's why I want you to hold it in your mind. What is it that brings you to Djangonauts, to Django, to contributing? So, a warning. Being an open source maintainer puts your physical and mental health at risk. The reality of open source is, well, you've got a full-time job. Maybe you've got a family to support, you've got rent to pay or a mortgage to pay. On top of all of that, you're squeezing out time in the evenings and the weekends to work on your projects. On top of that, you've got demanding users turning up and oftentimes being aggressive on your repo because, well, they've got an issue in their project that's somehow your fault. And then there's a serious bug in the latest version that needs a new release on PyPI ASAP. And you haven't been able to get a decent session on the feature branch you're actually interested in months. And people keep asking you in discussions about when that feature branch is going to be ready. Right? Open source contributors, they burn out. And with the stress of it, there's no wonder. In Django, it used to be called the meat grinder. And it was this sort of dark humor. The meat grinder. Imagine it, right? Imagine it. Django would take new contributors and chew them up over a course of a year or two and then spit them up. And so, oh, we need some more meat for the meat grinder, right? I mean, that's what it was like. So I think in open source, we have bad expectations. Right? People treat open source maintainers like they're being paid for it, as if, not just that the maintainers are being paid, but the user was paying the maintainer themselves, right? Rather than just sort of taking it for free. I need a new release. I need this feature added. I need this bug fixed, and I need it now. And this never ends. The maintainers, well, we come to identify as maintainers, right? I maintain Django, and that means that I'm expected to show up and to do so, even if that's the last thing in the world that I should be doing right now. When I began in open source, I watched as heroes of mine in the Django community struggled with this problem to various degrees of absolute full meltdown. It's the biggest danger. Because of this, well, we've got the Django Fellowship Program, right? The Django Fellowship Program was created so that the fellows could do the day-to-day maintenance on Django and then make sure it keeps going. And it's absolutely clear to me that the Fellowship Program is the reason that Django was able to keep going until it's nearly 20 years old. Without the fellowship program, that just wouldn't have happened. It might have got to 5, it might have got to 10, but it wouldn't have got beyond that period. Right, but here's the warning: you're not being paid. Right? Now, you know that, you're painfully aware of it. We all know that, but we don't always act like we know that. We often give far more than is reasonable given the fact that it's a volunteer thing that we're doing. Right? It has a consequence. Open source skews overwhelmingly white, male, and English speaking. The bottom line is that contributing to open source is a privilege that only a few can afford. We like to think it's a meritocracy. Well, you do the time, you get the hard, you do the hard yards, you work on your project, you get the rewards. But well, sorry, meritocracy, my ass. Right? What's really going on is that pre-existing economic relations are being reinforced by the contributors leveraging the inequality of opportunity that those economic relations provide. Sorry, in English, if you let it, open source extracts such a cost, physical, financial, emotional, that the only folks who can do it are the global rich, and only of those, the ones that are either directly supported by or can make their way around the patriarchy. English-speaking white men. You'll notice I said if you let it, or you may not have noticed I said if you let it, but I did. Because it's not all doom and gloom. Remember, I believe in open source. I invested in it. Remember, should I do open source, Carlton? Heck yes, right? So what we're going to do is talk about, well, what to do or how to survive open source. I'm going to give you a couple of tips that you can think about as you go along. So tip 1 is know your limits. This was the title of the talk, right? Think about your limits. Limit the time you give to open source. Look after yourself. Correct the expectations, at least for yourself, right? You have to put in your own gas mark, right? You're busy. You don't have a lot of time for open source. Well, that's totally okay. Maybe you have an hour a week and maybe you can glance at GitHub when you're at the bus stop. And that's it. Well, so be it, right? That hour adds up over time. But if you're going to keep at it over time, it needs to be sustainable. So set that limit and then stick to it. And if there's an issue that needs fixing, that's not your problem. It will wait. You do your bit, and that's enough. Now, if it helps, then they'll just tell you that those who are actively involved in open source, they know this. You'll get pressure from random users on GitHub. After all these years, I have absolutely nothing I can say about how you stop that. Right? You'll maybe give yourself the pressure. Oh, I should be fixing that bug. Well, that's exactly what setting a limit is all about, right? If you change that expectation for yourself, you can take that pressure away. But you will essentially never get pressure from other maintainers. As I say, they know that they're not going to give you that, right? Think about your limits. As part of this, Take an Amnesty is a lovely website called volunteeramnestyday.net, which is every solstice, take an inventory of your volunteer responsibilities, and anything that you think is too much, you're allowed on that day, you can just say, I take an amnesty, and I'm giving it. So summer solstice, winter solstice, take it. I love Volunteer Amnesty Day. I think it's just such a lovely thing. And then while you're thinking about limits, think too about your project limits, right? Well, so you've only got so much time, but that means that your project has to fit in the time that you have available for it. So keep it tight, right? That means you have to say no to requests. Something might be nice to have, but if you can't sustainably maintain it, then it's a harm to you and it's a harm to your project. So it's also, it's also about fun. Code that gets too complex is no fun to maintain. Or can we add this hook? Well, it's dry. Oh, but if you add enough hooks, your code becomes unreadable. It's no fun. Can we just add this keyword arg? Well, code that no one's using is so much fun. If a user comes on and they demand this keyword arg for this 1% of use cases, every user then has to read about it and realize it's not for them and understand it. And your code becomes less fun to maintain. So you add it, but then it's you that's on the hook to maintain it. And not even the user who originally requested it is using it because they've gone off and they're using some other project. Right? So keep your code tight. Don't think about the limits of your project. And then think about the limits of other people's projects too, because there's a flip side. You want to make a contribution to a project, but does that fit within what the maintainer has available to give to their project? You're asking them to take on something that has a cost. And you'll be upset if they say no, but step back, do the empathy work. What's it look like from their end? Right? Maybe there just isn't room in their project for your feature. You want more? Well, I want this feature. Yes, well, fine. You want more? Well, get help or help yourself, right? If we actively think about capacity limits, we can build projects that are sustainable in a really wide sense of that word, that they can keep going, they can grow, they can stay the right size, they can not consume too much of the love, the life force that we give to them, right? So know your limits, right? That's step one, right? Really think about what the capacity really is in open source. And then step two, well, tip two, that's maximize the juice. You're not getting paid. You don't have all the time in the world to make thousands of contributions. Well, so let's make the ones that you do make, let's make them pay, right? So third point one of this is put it on your CV. Seriously, don't be shy. Oh, it wasn't enough to brag about. Rubbish, put it on your CV. Oh, everyone has better things to say. Rubbish, put it on your CV. Most people don't have anything to say. Hiring managers are desperate. They've got a mountain of CVs or ECV. They're this big, right? And they're desperate to find something that lets them sort them quickly into the yes pile and the no pile. And they want most of them in the no pile. So if you've got an open source contribution, even if it's just one, it makes you stand out from that crowd. Okay, put it on your CV. And then keep a public log. Like keep a blog, do a little Django app just for yourself, your playground, put it online, and then write about what you do. I cannot stress this enough. You do a little post, you think it's nothing, you'll end up in Django news. A tech lead will subscribe to your RSS feed, or they will follow you on Mastodon. And then you'll mention that you're looking for work, and then you'll suddenly get an email or a direct message. Why? Because you put it online. Need inspirations? Will see the fellow reports that Natalia does on the forum. See the lightweight TIL, Today I Learned post that people do. So you don't feel like, oh, I have to publish this 10,000 word definitive blog post on the nature of the ORM abstraction. But no, today I learned that you can override the form set method and do this, right? Just put it up, lightweight things. The bottom line is that your contributions and your learnings, they add up over time. Now, if you have a public log, that adding up is visible and you can use it. But if you haven't got that public log, it's not visible and you can't use it. So it's up to you to make it visible, to put it out there. Get yourself a little Django app, build it yourself, get it online, use it as your playground, and log what you do. Then tell a story. So take a single issue you did and elaborate on it. Make it into like a case study. Right? Like write up exactly what you did and what you did. You go to an online application, or you go to a job interview, and they'll say, "Tell us about the time that you used Superpower X to do wonderful thing Y." Well, take the case study that you've written up, and then fit it into the template, because it's always like, I used my team working skills to achieve a thing. Okay, so I worked with other people to get this thing that I've written up done. Or use your reasoning skill. Oh, well, or used your code awareness, whatever tell us about. It's a stock question. Tell us about the time that you did X, you used X to do Y. And the X and the Y, they don't matter. Take one thing that you do and write it up in depth so that you can repurpose that for these interviews, and you've got it ready, and then, oh wow, this candidate really knows their stuff, right? And then the final section, this is the career hack is learn the tooling, right? Let's say you get a job, and let's say you turn up on the first day, there's a totally alien code base and it's incomprehensible and you can't do anything. But well, let's say they don't use black. Well, you can add black, right? Because you know about black because you've learned the tooling working on the open source projects. Let's say they don't use ISOR. Well, you can add ISOR. Let's say they don't use Flake 8. Well, you can add that. They've got GitHub, but they haven't got CI. Well, you can set up CI. Or they haven't even got GitHub. They haven't even got version control. Whatever it is, you can add those things because you've learned these tools working on the open source projects. They can't upgrade because they can't test the new version. Well, you know about TOPS, you know about testing different versions because you've learned them on the open source projects, or whatever. Well, they have docs. Let's say their docs are like a few text files just stuck in a folder, and that's their docs. Well, put them into Sphinx, right? And then put a site up with the fancy Fullo theme that everyone uses that's nice to look at. Oh, wow, isn't that great? And so on. By the time you've done all that, the team are like, wow, you're great. And their lives are a whole lot better than they were when you turned up. And you've had the time to get to learn the code base so that you're now productive on it. And it's like, wow, this person was productive from day one. You weren't productive from day one. You added black, you added ISOR, you added flake 8, you set up restructured text. And in that time, you sneakily learned enough to actually get some quote unquote real work done. You were an enabler. So your review comes around, your annual review or your quarterly review, or whatever it is, and you say to your boss, boss, I'd really like that mid-level role, please. You think every team already does all this. You're like, oh no, but that's not going to help. No. Open source projects are doing more than the median team by a long way. If you take everything you learn on a best practice open source project and you take it to an employer, you are going to be valuable from day one. So that's more or less it. So having open source, well, know your limits, yours and others, and get help if you need it. And then maximize the juice. You're doing a good job. Tell people. That's it.
Well done. Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
That was excellent. I don't know if you saw in the Discord, Mo said he was loving every second of this talk, and that definitely was how I felt as well.
I didn't see. Which channel are we in the Discord?
The general channel.
General. Okay, brilliant.
For everyone.
Thank you. So thank you, Mo.
What we will do is use the raise the hand feature, or if you want to type your question out, we'll go that route. I'm going to start with one. Carlton, so you said the last part there about learning some tooling. If someone wants to improve their pure developer skills, do you have any suggestions on resources or places they can go to learn that?
So I'd recommend for this kind of tooling type point, I'd just recommend Adam's book, which is called something about Django developer experience improving something. Adam's
just get DX.
Yeah. Thank you. That's the one. And he goes through like the flake 8s and the blacks and the ISORts and the pre-commits and like all these tools that we use. And he's got his 3-pack of books. Just get all 3 because they're all amazing. And just get the e-edition so you get the free updates when he updates. Like literally, just invest in your career and go and buy those 3 books would be my kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, that's the answer. Get Adam's book.
Thank you. Anyone else with a question?
How do I add a reaction to Brynja's comment?
I have a question, but I can't find the raise the hand feature.
I thought it was in here, right?
Yeah, it must be somewhere.
It's under reactions.
It's under reactions. I got it. Okay, fine.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Carlton. So, I don't feel any pressure when I see people with like issues or all this kind of stuff. But I feel more pressure when I see other people that you've gotten to know kind of struggle with the random person being a bit more aggressive or whatever. Or also, so that's one version. And then also when there's kind of like a disagreement between a bunch of people that you like and they kind of just want it to progress in a nice way and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So the dynamics I find I feel more pressure from the social dynamics than I do from like the issues and things, because I think, oh, maybe I should try and pitch in here and all this kind of stuff. Do you have any thoughts or opinions on that?
Yeah, I've thoughts and opinions on everything, so I certainly do on that. The people is the hardest bit. The people side of it just is the hardest bit. It's like, apart from maybe some really deep thing in the ORM, that might be harder than the people think. But so when somebody is being aggressive or inappropriate or whatever, then the analogy I always have is that of a tag team. So that's when Tim Graham stepped back from being the fellow. I was the junior fellow at the time, and I spoke with the fellow committee about, did I want to go more time or whatever. I said, look, I don't want to do it full time, and I don't want to be the only fellow. And part of that is that I believe you need a support team. You need a network. I believe this. Tim did fellowing like for 5 years or 3 years by himself. I don't know how he did that full time by himself, but he did. But since there were two of us, I don't think this should ever go back to being one, because it's really, the fellows are on the front end, which is why I picked them as a particular example. But there is often like somebody who's just being inappropriate, and what you need to do is say, tag me, and the other person comes in and responds. It's why it's important there's a back channel in the in the chats. There needs to be, look, I need a bit of help here, and then someone else can step in and say, no, look, that I'm welling up at the thought of it. So that's my first thought, is that you need support and you need to help each other when somebody is being, because that just happens. And then disagreements, everybody has to remember that there's good intentions in all things, and we're on the same side and we're after the same thing. And often the disagreement is because we haven't actually seen what the other person's viewpoint really is. We've got our viewpoint and we're busy arguing for it, and that's great, because you must argue for your viewpoint. You must put your viewpoint forward, otherwise you're not presenting your case in the best light, and we've got no chance. But there's also that empathy job to try and see it, and that's really hard, and nobody's perfect at it and nobody gets it right every time. But all of us are first and foremost more committed to the community than we are to our own particular, whether or not we should use a keyword or have an attribute here. Like, no one cares. It doesn't matter. Like, the bit of Django that I'm most committed to is less important to me than the community as a whole, but I'm still going to argue strongly for my case, right? And it's not that we're falling out, really. I mean, you might get, people do fall out, people do get cross, but then you just, okay, like, it's like a piece of elastic, right? Human beings have emotions, and emotions come out even in open source forums, which should be perfectly rational. The point is, the piece of elastic gets stretched, and the question isn't does it get stretched, it's can we unstretch it again, right? Because it breaks if you keep it stretched, right? So okay, that conversation is a bit heated. Let's just step back and then let's try and reassess, and let's try and, okay, look, I've had another think about your thing. I see your put. This is the bit I agree with. This is the bit you don't. And what works? It can be difficult. What works is when you're able to narrow between you. You're able to narrow down. Actually, the bit we disagree on is this really tiny bit here, and we can, we don't care about this really. So let's go. That doesn't matter. With the shared agreement is much bigger than the disagreement, it turns out. But yes, it's intellectual and emotional labor. Yes, it is. And yes, it can be tiring. Does that leave anything unanswered?
No, I thought it's a nice perspective, because there's also, I mean, you made it a particular point about, having empathy and considering the scope of the project and all this kind of stuff. And most of the time when there's disagreements, it's around people suggesting something new or a change to the existing thing. And with both of those things, it's there's consequences. There's always consequences to this stuff, and but I've also found it interesting meeting people versus how they interact just from text and stuff. That's also very interesting. But I think it isn't as heated as it maybe sounds on occasion. I'll shut up because other people.
No. Just we've got loads of time, because I didn't do a 45-minute talk, so we've got time to chat. But I think it's one of the reasons why going to the conferences, if you can, it's really helpful, because you get to meet someone in person, and then you realise that that actually just a great person, and like the little disagreement you had online was about nothing, and then the next time you chat online you're like, oh, I know you, and their comment, you're like, oh, that's just them making, they've got a smile on their face when they type that. That's why emojis are important, right? People think emojis are unprofessional and stupid and all the rest of it. They're not. They're really important because emotion does not come across in written text, so you have to put the silly little thing next to it so that they know that you didn't mean it in that, you know, that straight way that it might have been read.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, it's
Sarah,
the most difficult one. Go on.
We're gonna go to Priya's question in the chat. So Carlton, Priya asked, sometimes while contributing to open source, one can get lost in the whole big code base. Reaching out to maintainers for help is nice, but there is always that slight hesitation about, is this question good enough to be asked on a public platform? In the same context, one can end up spending a lot of time and adding to, in the worst case, adding or ending up with no impactful contribution. How can you overcome that and know the limits of how much time can we spend on a particular issue before moving on to the next?
Okay. Yes, a big code base. It's just hard. And there's no way out of that. Django's got a big code base. Lots of code bases are big, but Django's got a big code base. And you know, if you want to dig into the ORM, it's going to take a while. It's going to take, you know, a while. It's not, and you know, not just the ORM. You can dig through the views bit. It's going to take a while. You dig through the request handler. It's going to take a while. Like that. Pretty much no question isn't good enough to be asked on a public platform, right? If you phrase it like this, I've been looking at this for about the last 3 hours, and I found this bit, and I just can't see how it goes. And you know, you elaborate the backstory. It's like, yeah, no, that's a perfectly reasonable question because that's really complicated code that you've dug into. Why on earth did you expect to understand it? Let me see if I can point you to this file over here where it sort of unvars a bit. And I don't know. But there is no question that isn't good enough to be asked on a public platform. Really, really, there isn't. I don't believe you can, even if you spend months working on a ticket and then it ends up being closed as actually this is resolved or we won't fix it or whatever, you've learned masses in that process. And so it depends what you mean by impactful contribution. If you mean massive PR merge into Django, well, no, you didn't get that. But the learning that you got from it was amazing. And take my sort of case study. How did you use Superpower X to do Y? Well, I spent months researching this to close this 10-year-old ticket that, you know, you can tell that case study to answer that interview question, even if the case study is, in the end, it didn't get fixed. In the end, it wasn't a quote unquote impactful contribution. It's impactful to you because you've learned a lot. And it's one more thing that's closed, one more thing that isn't going to be a dead end for a developer following in your wake. One more thing where we've clarified the situation and we can move on with pushing Django forward. So I think all of these things are meaningful. How much time to spend? Don't spend hours banging your head against a desk on your own in silence. If you give it half an hour, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, that's fine. Don't sit there 4 hours. Oh, I don't understand it. Ask for help. Like the embarrassment of asking the question on the public platform is trivial compared to the wasted life force of you suffering by yourself. It just is.
Thank you for that. Sarah.
Thank you for your talk. I have just one question. We all have faced at some point to imposter syndrome. So I guess you too. Do you have like any types or anything to share related to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was thinking about that today. So Marish is stepping down as fellow after 5 years. And I literally think of as Marish as the rock upon which Django has rested for the time that he's been a fellow. And that's absolutely true. But the sort of implicit thing there is, oh, well, he was a much better fellow than me. No, he wasn't. I was a good fellow too. I did it for 5 years. I was the rock. I was a rock upon which Django rested too. but I still have that. Oh no, but the thing is, he knows his bit, I know mine. We worked amazingly as a team for all that time. But literally today, I'm sitting there thinking about Maris and his end of time as a fellow, and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm just holding him up on this pedestal which I can't compete. It's like, but that's just ridiculous. Like, we're both massively skilled and have done the job and know it inside out, and but still I'm like, oh no, but I can't compete with Marius. Yeah, of course I can. You know, we just move away from the ORMs and into the view layer, and you know, things, you know, and but he's perfectly capable there as I am over there. It's like, it's not a competition, it's not that, but that thought still comes up. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In general, imposter syndrome, you just, the little hater, you just have to talk it down. There's no way around it. It's there for everybody. And I think just trying to be objective, trying to step back again and say, and have a look at the people around you, saying, hang on, am I really any worse than that bloke over there? I'm like, no, I'm not. You know, there's no general solution, but yes, it affects me and it affects everybody.
Apologize if I get your name wrong. I couldn't find this pronunciation. Marjorique?
Marijke. It's
I tried.
It's Dutch.
All right.
It's my company name for a reason. But also regarding imposter syndrome, first, thank you, Carlton. This is an amazing talk. I wish I had heard this like years ago. One thing about imposter syndrome, by the way, I always say people who have imposter syndrome, they doubt themselves, like, oh, am I imposing? And a real imposter knows they're imposing. So when you're doubting yourself, you're actually, you know, that's sort of the mindset that I use. But that wasn't the question. It's a bit related. I have found myself, I've been a programmer for many years, but I found myself just not really knowing all the internals of Django, and just like recently I found out there's multiple CSS files in Django admin. I found that out after I made a change, and then Marius was like, oh, you have to change it there as well. And I had a couple of those things. And at some point then I was almost feeling like I was wasting his time. And Thibaut said logically, well, he's being paid for it. So, you know, do you have some encouraging words for those of us stumbling around and not knowing what we're doing?
Yeah, just, there's no way to get to knowing what you're doing without what is it? I don't know, Lao Tzu, in order to do something well, you must first be prepared to do it badly. Like, you have to be a beginner to get to be a medium, to get to be an advanced. Like, you just, there's no shortcut. Oh yeah, I donged on the head and I suddenly recalled from the celestial spheres the internal structure of the Django code base. Like, that doesn't happen, right? It's an experiential thing. The thought that came to me as you were asking the question was about, like, people have often asked me, why is the review in Django so pernickety? And the bottom line is because it's one of the largest projects in the Python ecosystem, and it's deployed on hundreds of thousands of projects, if not millions of projects around the world constantly. And the reason it's deployed is because its quality is so high. And the only reason its quality is so high is because nothing gets merged until it's as close to perfect as we can get it. And mistakes are made, and, you know, follow-up patches get made. But basically, the reason why it's so pernickety is that it's got to be right. It's got to be just right. And that's, again, a difference between what you do in work. It's that at work, you can be like, oh, that'll do, and I can, you know, fix it later. And that's just how companies work, because they're on a much sort of more cost-driven, get it done quickly type basis. So why is Django any good? Yes, it is good. It's good because the reviews are pernickety, and so the sort of thought for the individual contributor is, that's not about you. It's about the patch. And it's like, literally, let's just go over the patch and let's make sure it's right. And the fellow's job is to do that with a fine tooth comb. And Marish is very good with the eagle eye at spotting the missing full stop and the line wrapping, and he's just amazing at it in a way that that wasn't where I came from. I'd be like, yeah, that's fine. And Marish would be like, no, this, but those little corrections are just like, yeah, merge that, merge that, merge that, merge that, done, we're finished. I don't feel I've quite addressed your question. I've sort of rambled around it a bit, but I'm not sure I've got quite to the heart of it.
Well, you make a good point. My point was just like feeling like I was wasting his time because he was picking up all the little bits of slack that I felt I had dropped because I didn't search well enough to find that second CSS file, for example, or whatever. But
yeah, no, the straight answer to that is no, you're not wasting his time at all. That is just, he's just there saying, oh, and by the way, this needs to be done as well. Like, so quite often it'll be, I don't know, I'm trying to think of another example that isn't related to CSS, but like, no one's obviously not coming to me right now, but let's say there's a related change. It's like, look, you need to make the related change over there. Oh, I didn't even know that existed. Oh, well, you do now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was it. Also, the other question you answered was really great. And sorry to whoever I just interrupted.
No, don't apologize. You didn't interrupt. Don't apologize.
No, I was going to add to what you just said. I had a very similar experience when I first started, if this helps. Felt like by the end, what got merged in, I don't think I wrote any of it. I think I ended up, I had submitted something, you get the bombardments of reviews, and your first review's got like 10 comments, and then you resolve them all and all this kind of stuff, and you're like, oh, maybe this is okay, and then you wait a bit, and then you get another review wave and all this kind of stuff. And there's definitely a feeling like if they really wanted this done, they would have done it much faster themselves than having me just fumble around and go, oh yes, okay, good idea, why not? And oh yeah, okay, blah blah blah. And I'd say it does get better. You become more familiar with, like, for example, with the stylistic things, with the line wrapping and the full stops and all this kind of stuff. Like, you have people tell you, and then now you remember, and all this kind of stuff, and then you
imagine it before black.
And then with the things with the CSS stuff, now there's 2 files, and if you were to do it again, and it does get easier. And then there was one other thing I wanted to say was when Carlton was talking about different types of people, and the people who are more challenging are people who raise issues with no commitment or follow through to do anything. So anybody who's a doer, like if you're raising a PR or if you're trying to make a discussion on, if you're a doer, because this is not necessarily, especially when it isn't something you raised, you just want to try and get this closed and all this kind of stuff, then you're already in another category of people where it's like, it's helpful and it's very much appreciated.
Can I just follow up on that point? So you asked a question before about, when there's disagreements of, say, about adding a feature. I think this is the key bit, is if someone's proposing a feature and there's a concrete, I'm going to do it and I'm going to be on the line for maintaining it, it's quite easy actually to get the pieces to move, the continental plates of Django to shift out the way to let that feature in. It's when it's like, oh, wouldn't this be great? But then there's nothing. And it's like, and at that point, not everybody, but everybody just goes, no. And that distinction between doer and issue raiser, there's something deep in that.
All right. I'm gonna thank you, Carlton.